Seelie Court episode, I was going to have my pipe instead of my cigar.
Oh.
All right, here we go. You guys ready?
Super Gandalf.
Mm-hmm.
And we are going live in 3, 2, 1.
What is promising to be a fairly moderate length. We're going to be going up and down the serpent.
Hey everyone, it's Thursday, September 21st. My name is Bobby Frankenberger, and you're listening to episode 26 of the Sixth World Podcast. The executive producer for today's episode, as usual, we love the guy. His name's James O'Neill. Thanks for supporting the show. And as always, I'm joined by my enigmatic co-host, Cassie Levitt. How you doing, Cassie?
Good. How you doing, sir?
I am doing well. We just had a very strange day here at the house. Our back door was replaced, and it took like all day, so we spent all day upstairs because it was really annoying being downstairs hearing a bunch of noise, and it was it felt kind of like we were getting cabin fever after a while. It was pretty rough. But before I get too much into stories like that, I want to introduce our guest. Our guest today has been on the show a couple of times before. You guys have seen him around the Shadowrun community. Crow Shaman extraordinary and extraordinaire. The host of the Neo-Anarchist podcast, Opti. Thank you, Opti. Welcome to the show.
Hey guys, I always love to be here. It's fun.
Yeah, we love to have you. And we're going to be talking about the Seelie Court. So that's going to be really exciting and fun, and I enjoyed a lot of reading about it. So it's going to be good. Are you laughing at me or?
Yeah, a little bit. That's okay. It's a little soon to be deceiving the listeners, Bobby.
Oh no! I'm always deceiving the listeners. So speaking of a new door, I just said we had a new door installed in our house, and it took all day. And I wanted to ask you guys a question, if this was weird. See, around lunchtime, I had to make lunch for the kids, and so I made them all lunch, sandwiches and stuff, and I made myself a little something and sat down at the table to eat it, which is like 8 feet away from the door that this guy was working on, and I didn't, like, should I have offered him lunch? Because it was kind of weird, us, like, sitting there and, yum, this is really good, and I bet you're hungry.
No, he should plan accordingly. A drink, maybe. I don't know that you need to offer him appetizers.
I think I would have offered, but like I would have expected him to say no, and I think I would have been a little bit weirded out if he said yeah.
And that's the real, you see, you're from Texas, that's the real Southern way to do things, is to be polite, but get annoyed if they take you up on the offer.
Yeah. Yeah, and then if he did, I would have said like, oh, but he was hungry, bless his heart.
Yeah.
Which is like Southern for, God damn it.
Yeah. There's a lot of code there, and the way you interact with people, a lot like the way things happen in the Seelie Court.
Nice.
Did you know that we just recorded our last actual play session? I've had that on the mind for a while. The Complex Action actual play session. We just finished recording it, and it was bittersweet and fun, and I'm looking forward to letting that stuff out. But Cassie, you were a joy to play with. So.
Yeah? You sure about that?
I am absolutely sure about that.
All right, good deal.
So, yeah, I'm still trying to decide what I'm going to do with that feed in the future, but I probably what'll end up happening is sometime after all those episodes are up and stuff, I'll end up putting them on the like website in some fashion, form, and easy to download bulk or something like that. Speaking of our website, we've been getting a lot of we have the Shadowcasters website, right? And we get a lot of comments on things that are posted up there, and I had to share at least one of these because I think it's so funny, the spam comments you get. Some of them are usually like some they try to be subtle. Like they'll be like how amazing it is like your post was really good. I got lots of information out of it. Thanks for posting. And so it's like really generic. But I got one that was like it was like this. It says, wow, how amazing it is. You're great. Your chocolate bark is perfect for gifts. Thanks, Lindsay, for sharing with us this great recipes. Like, who are you trying to get with that spam?
Lindsay?
Lindsay, the one who makes chocolate bark?
It's like, you know what? I bet there's going to be a Lindsay out there making chocolate bark.
Yeah, clearly beavers, right?
We're going to spam all the podcasts until we get it.
It's like, maybe it's their first phishing scam. I don't know. It was, I had to share that. It was hilarious. So what have you been doing with Shadowrun, you guys, over the past 2 weeks? Or Opti, it's been a while since we spoke to you. What's been your Shadowrun life lately?
Let's see. My Shadowrun life has been writing almost exclusively. I got a crap ton coming down the pike, and I just got approved to do a novella that's coming out next year. So I've been trying to tighten up all my stuff and get my focus on so that I can get all of this stuff done, hopefully before the end of the year. That, and I started a new home game, so that's kind of fun. Yeah,
that's
cool.
I
have a home game on Sundays all the time, but like I invited new people and we kind of kicked off a new campaign, so that's kind of fun. So
I haven't had a home game since 2004, probably.
You're invited. Come on down.
Oh yeah, it's a short drive from South Carolina to Texas.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe
still technically in the South, right? So.
Yeah, that's true. I don't have to cross the Mason-Dixon, which is really.
Is that where you draw the line?
Yeah,
that's
it.
That's literally where he draws the line.
That's where the line is literally drawn. Yeah. Cassie, what's been going on with you in Shadowrun?
We just went to space.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we went to the Apollo station, which is an Ares station up there, and we stole some stuff. Stole some lasers.
Well, you're in space. What else are you gonna steal?
I mean, what else are you gonna steal? We found a nanofax that was possessed by CFD and was just printing out odd organic life forms that tried to attack people.
That's awesome.
They were creepy. It was fantastic.
That's amazing. Did you come up with this on your own? This idea?
The nanofaxes? No, that's straight from stolen souls. Yeah. But putting it all on the Apollo space station, that's just mine. But
that's great. I love it.
It was fun. Yeah.
Yeah, I have been doing everything I do related to Shadowrun is made for public consumption. So you guys know what I've been doing. I've said it before. That's how I get my Shadowrun in, is I have to use the excuse that it's for work. Although with the actual play clearing up, I keep saying it, and I'm actually going to do it. I'm getting on there like this weekend, Cassie, on the Emerald Grid to see what kind of games I might be able to schedule for myself in the coming weeks.
You've been saying that for weeks.
Well, soon the proof pudding will be served.
Hey, I got a deep run. You play a hacker. Let's go into a foundation. Come on, Bobby.
Oh, dear Lord.
Hey, I've got a run for you too. If you can get a group of deckers together.
Yeah?
Yeah. Oh, I think I know what you're alluding to. Is that out now?
You talk about the podcast episode that I just put out?
Is that what you're referring to? The Info and a Job on the Neo-Anarchist podcast?
It is indeed, yeah. I'd love to have somebody go do that run and then report back how it went.
Ooh, that would be cool. Yeah.
Would Emerald Grid be a cool place for that to happen?
Yeah, we'll do it. All right.
Yeah, really? Would you really do that?
Yeah. I've ran your runs before. I've actually had Bishada go do runs and then done some of the old ones you had in the past posted.
Yeah.
And got the info lock from the symbols.
Give me links to those. I'd love to listen to that.
Okay, yeah. Next, I'll listen to this current one and I'll see
And
if I can put
this
that in
last
play.
one is particularly important because it concerns DeForest, who is Opti's adoptive daughter, and that's my actual daughter's character. And so I had to tell
cool.
her that like I killed her character by giving her CFD, and she was really distraught. And I said, "Oh no, it's okay. Runners will take care of it." So,
No big deal.
Yeah.
What
Yeah,
a dad.
My October schedule is still somewhat clear, so I will pull that out and see what we can do with it.
Awesome.
And I can write it up for next month's Patreon. That you can couple that with it, so people have opposition and stuff all statted out.
oh,
Cool.
that would be amazing!
All
Oh
right.
my gosh! Oh
Well,
my
how about-
gosh! I'll be in my bunk.
That'll
All
be
right,
cool.
you can be in your fun.
All right, here we go.
World News Today.
All right. You know, I say every time that it's a little quiet, but I checked the volume, and that was supposed to be louder. Anyway, news. We only have one piece of news, and it's news about us. Cassie, our podcast is a year old.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. September 22nd of 2016 was our first episode. So, what a year it's been.
How fantastic that we got Chad to come back for that. Then
Oh my
he
god!
was our first official guest.
Holy cow!
Yeah.
We planned that.
I
We
did that
planned
totally
right?
on purpose.
And knowing that was happening, I also accepted on purpose.
Yeah.
Mhm.
We've accidentally. Now we have to do it again after another year. Crap.
Yeah, after I fouled this one up so bad,
Yeah.
you might want to retake it.
But that's all the news for. It's been a fun year though. It's I think we've come a long way, and I'm still enjoying it, so that's a good thing. Yeah, I mean, you never know. You never know how long something's gonna last once you get it started. You know, and I definitely was hoping it would last a year, but you never know. So here's to another year, guys.
You got a Bud Light? You cheering that?
No, I've got a glass of water.
All right, all right.
I'll crack a. I got an Oktoberfest for
Yay,
after the show.
yummy.
But let's
Got
move.
sausages in the fridge.
Yes, that's Oktoberfesty. All right, so
Wait, can we? Wait, news. Can we mention the adventure? What was it? Lethal Force came out?
I was not aware. What did I miss?
That,
What? Did it really?
yeah, that was the name of it,
What?
right?
Oh wait, no, okay. I thought you were talking about a different thing.
Not Street Lethal.
Um,
Lethal
not
Forces
Street Lethal.
was the
Lethal
new
Forces.
adventure that rolled out. I just wanted to drop a
Yeah.
mention to it in case anyone hadn't checked it out. It looks really cool. I
Cool.
bought it. I
Like-
read through it.
It like stealth dropped.
Yeah, well, most things do. I wasn't overly surprised, but I actually bought it and I looked through it and it looks super cool.
Awesome.
If you're wanting like a advanced runner, prime level runner kind of run to do, throw it out there. It's got all the stuff in it, like corpse and factions and evil things to kill. It's great.
Yeah, that's awesome. So yeah, check that
Has
out.
anybody been using the factions, by the way, like on ML Grid or anything? Like, is the
I
faction stuff
actually
getting
have
played?
been, yeah, so we're going to start actually using them. I had to homebrew some stuff to like get an idea of like how factions ranked with each other and then make them into group contacts basically. So then you can up your connection with them and do the faction stuff. So yeah, I've actually expanded a lot on it and we're going to be doing faction runs.
Nice. Because
You
Hero
remember
Lab
the-
doesn't like do the faction stuff yet, so
Yeah, I think you can count it with one of the counters in the back maybe, or you might have to enable it, but it's
you
not
can
very.
you can like do it during character creation, and then once you upgrade it, like it says you can do it, but like it doesn't work.
Doesn't work. Okay, that
Bug.
doesn't
The bug.
surprise me. Yeah, there's a. Do you remember the old Hazard Pay book?
Uh-huh.
Has all the bounties. I'm converting all of those to 5th edition, and we're gonna go hunting all of those, and they're
Oh
all
my
faction
gosh.
stuff, right? Like,
That's a cool idea.
yeah, since they're
um,
all like different factions fighting with each other, we're
Yeah.
gonna throw that in there.
That's really cool. That's really
Yeah.
cool. You guys got great ideas.
Well, you're welcome to steal any of them you'd like.
I wanna play in them, but like my time is just not my own.
Well,
Yeah.
that's fair.
Like right, I wanna just be like I wanna do the Emerald Grid like 24/7 because that sounds like so much fun. I just haven't been able to do it.
Well, they're one shots, and so you jump into them when you want to. You don't have to commit to games. That's the best part. If you can commit 4 to 5 hours a night, you're good. Even if you just want to show up and be a guest speaker, Opti can be the Johnson at a job, and then you.
Oh, I love that. I love
away.
that.
All right, well, we're gonna move on to this. Q&A time. Every episode we do some Q&A from our listeners from around the Shadowrun community. They send us stuff. You can send us questions that you want us to answer by going to our website, sixthworldpodcast.com, and submitting a question on the form that we have there. You can also email us at theshow@sixthworldpodcast.com or just tweet us at the number 6worldpodcast. If you want your questions to have priority, by the way, then all of our patrons who ask questions get priority on us answering questions for them. So check out our Patreon, patreon.com/sixthworldpodcast if you want to do that. The first question we have today is from Daniel Barkum, who asks a Matrix host-related question. Says, I have a few questions regarding hosts in the Matrix. I've been avoiding using hosts in my local game since I'm not sure how to handle them. I've just connected cameras, locks and such to comlinks instead, but that leaves it out so much cool stuff like ice and such, which is really a shame. How do you handle distance when it comes to hosts? When I read the description in the core rulebook, it says that hosts have no physical location, but in the Matrix, it seems to have a location related to a physical one, but with a distance to the ground related to its importance. That doesn't really make sense to me, though. Distance increases the noise, so the more important a host is, the higher up it would be and the higher the noise would be for anyone to get in. That seems a bit harsh. Thanks for making a great show, Daniel. Thanks, Daniel. Cassie, I think this is a pretty easy question to answer.
Yeah. I've got good news for you, Daniel. Distance noise doesn't matter when it comes to hosts.
Yeah.
So you never have to think about distance noise and hosts.
Yeah.
Unless you want to get really tricky with locations and grids and try to flub it, but don't bother. Yeah, distance noise doesn't matter for hosts. So you never have to worry about that. Spam noise and static noise can matter, but that's not really related to the host. That's more related to your device and where your location's at and where you're trying to connect from.
Yeah.
So just throw out noise and host for the most part if it's related to distance.
Yeah, if you want two things to kind of justify that. First of all, it says straight on core rulebook on page 235, it says, quote, for all intents and purposes, there is no physical distance to any host in the Matrix, end quote. But also, when they're talking about, like Cassie just alluded to, noise has to do with the distance between devices, generally, and a host isn't a device. So, there you go.
Yeah, so you might encounter noise if you're in Seattle and you're on the book grid and you're trying to hack somebody who's in Boston or in Chicago, right? Then that's distance to that persona over there. But if you're in a host, everyone's direct connected and you're good to go. And hosts themselves aren't normally bothered by noise. There's some exceptional cases if you get some of the programs, like, what's that one that everyone loves and hates? Anyway, there's a program that causes some noise, but most people sort of home rule that noise is like internal to your deck, not related to distance or any external factors.
Right.
So that's one kind of special case. But yeah, just drop it. Don't worry about noise and hosts.
Yep.
If you have more questions, Daniel, write us back. I'll answer you more stuff on the Matrix anytime.
Yeah, and again, Cassie the only thing you might have to worry about is your host being on a different grid, but as Cassie also suggested, which I agree, I don't even pay attention to grids.
I definitely pay attention to grids, but that's a -2 penalty. It's not related to noise again.
Yeah. So forget it.
Grids are fantastic. Read about them in data trails. They're awesome.
I think I like the idea. I think that they I don't know. I always feel like it bogged down. And maybe it's just because I forget, and so I'm about grids and the penalties, and so I'm post hoc rationalizing my forgetfulness and my bad GMing, but I tend to ignore it. Thanks for your question, Daniel. Next question is from Cory Barnes. This is kind of a podcasting related question. I get these sometimes, and I usually I don't ignore them. Sometimes I'll answer the person directly, but I usually don't pick them for the show because it's a very narrow audience. But I've gotten a lot of these questions in various venues lately, and I feel like it's so many people are doing actual plays and podcasts related to Shadowrun now. So I thought it might help some people, or maybe even inspire people who think that this is harder than it appears. His question was, I hope all is well in your lives. I want to preface my question with a brief background. He's a listener to podcasts. He enjoys all the content we do in the Shadowcasters network. And he's getting into this kind of stuff. And so he was inspired by what we're doing with the network and with podcasts in general. So his question is, do you have any advice for someone like him who would like to get involved in podcasting and other Shadowrun-related media content? So my answer to that, I'll be brief, again, because, this is sort of a narrower audience for this question, but it really depends a lot, Cory, on what type of advice you're looking for, technical, quality advice or content advice and stuff like that. But what I'll say is that getting into podcasting is a lot easier than I think a lot of people realize, and it's not as expensive maybe as people realize. But for the technical aspect of it, so here's some things you want to do. Get a cheap microphone. Microphones are important because people get really irritated with listening to bad audio. In fact, when I do video stuff and people used to ask me about making YouTube videos, I used to always tell them the first thing to spend your money on is not a camera even, it's a microphone, because people can tolerate bad audio a lot. It's harder to tolerate that. But I have a suggestion. I always suggest this particular camera. It's a microphone. It's an Audio-Technica microphone. It was my first one. It's the ATR 2100. It's got great audio, and it's only like $65 on Amazon right now. Get that. Just Google DIY techniques all over the place. That's everything I use. I wish I could show you everything that's in this studio right now. It's all made by hand. But DIY recording booth and DIY pop filter. Those are the two first things you're going to want to figure out how to do. And then download Audacity and look up a tutorial for that, because Audacity is a free program and everyone uses it. Also, you can even host your podcast for free on a site called one that I used to use called Shout Engine. When you're first starting out, you're not going to have a lot of listeners, and that's the only thing that they limit for the free stuff is the download bandwidth. So if you're not getting a lot of downloads, then you don't have to worry about it. And then if you do want to pay for unlimited download bandwidth, then you go with what we use is Libsyn. So check that out. Now the more interesting stuff about advice about how to make content that's going to last and quality-wise. And my advice is always that you really got to plan everything that you're going to do. Don't take for granted that you're excited about something and that it'll come easily when you turn the microphone on. I am very excited about Shadowrun, and every time I turn the microphone on, I freeze up. So I have to have so much stuff written down. Even this advice I'm giving you right now, I'm reading it on the notes. So plan. That's what I say. Don't wing it, especially when you first start, because a lot of planning goes a long way, or a little planning goes a long way. Also, don't try to do too much when you first start out. It needs to be content that you can sustain, because one of the biggest pieces of advice I have for people who are making videos or audio is that you want to be consistent as best as you can. So sometimes you can get away with not being consistent because your content is super awesome and people really, really love it. But if
I feel like he's digging me right now.
A little bit.
Oh yeah. So I actually that was an unintentional dig. So Opti here is a good example. Everybody loves Opti and still listens to him, but his consistency is terrible, or has been in the past.
True.
But he was able to get away with it. He's the only one doing what he's doing. So
that's a good thing to learn. Like do something that no one else is doing.
Mm-hmm.
You can suck really, really bad, but if you're filling a niche that nobody else is filling, then you got this.
Yeah, and that's true. It's a funny way to say that try to figure out what you can do differently. If you're just trying to turn on the microphone and record your home games and make it an actual play, that's cool too. The point is just make sure you're having fun doing it. So. There. That's the general advice I want to give. Like I said, I don't want to spend a terrible amount of time going over it, but I've been getting a lot of questions about it, so I thought I'd address it. That's it. I say we jump right in. Today we're talking about the Seelie Court. And we've been wanting to do this episode for a long time, and we read a lot of Court of Shadows, and I know there's a lot of other stuff on the Seelie Court in older editions, like 4th edition and stuff. Well, maybe not a lot of stuff, but references to it anyway. And But the first thing I want to do before we get into it is briefly kind of set the bar here and make sure everybody knows what we're talking about when we say the Seelie Court, because I know that I really didn't, when I went into this, I really didn't know what this was about. So I think it's worthwhile to make sure everybody is near the same page. And there's a good chance that I may get some of this wrong, and either of you who know better than me, make sure you correct me if I do. So, real quick, the Seelie Court is basically it's the home of all the ancient fae creatures and everything and it's been around since possibly before the Fourth World, but at least since the Fourth World. And that's where all these mysterious fae creatures and fairies and whatnot exist on this, and it's a metaplane. They exist on this metaplane, and its inhabitants lead incredibly long lives.
Can I stop you right there?
Yeah.
And correct something that you've
Sure,
already said?
sure, absolutely.
So the Seelie is not a place. The Seelie Court is not necessarily a place. It is a faction, one faction on the fae or the fairy metaplane. So the Seelie Court itself is not the metaplane. It's a faction that existed on a metaplane, and there's more to say than that. But that's I just want to get it. I just want to get it right. That's
a really good point, and it's not even really a particularly pedantic point either, because I do think that's an important point. Does the metaplane itself have a name? Are you aware?
Yeah, it's the fairy metaplane.
It's just called the fairy metaplane.
Here's the trick. Like, there's a lot of different kind of like nitpicky ways to break it all down, because even as I say that the Seelie Court is not a metaplane, it also technically kind of is a metaplane. But we can talk about how that is in a minute, I guess. But I'm just saying, like, if you want to start, like, if you want to start from the beginning, you have the fairy metaplane, which is its own thing, and then you have like our world, which is its own thing.
Sure.
And you had the fairy or the Seelie Court, and you had the Unseelie Court, and then you have the Wild Fae, which is not really a faction; they're just doing their own thing. And then you have a whole bunch of other fae creatures that exist on this fairy metaplane. And then something happened, which again we could talk about in a minute. But something happened, and the Seelie Court and the Unseelie Court became sort of fractured metaplanes, and they exist and both don't exist at the same time between our plane and the fairy metaplane.
Right.
If that was like that's a weird way to explain it, but I don't think there's any shortcut. So that's kind of what we're talking about.
All right, good. Thank you for clearing that up. Like I said, guys, for this episode, I didn't know anything about this going into it, and as I'm sure we'll talk about this, the Court of Shadows book, which was largely what we used to research this, is a little bit confusing and makes it difficult to dig into this stuff. That's why we have people who know more about this than we do, like Opti here. So I'm gonna go into this, and again, I don't want to spend too long setting the stage. I want to get into some more interesting conversations, but I'm gonna couch this in questions. You tell me again if I'm right. So what I understand is that that the Seelie Court itself, like we said, specifically talking about the Seelie Court, it's not actually like a ruling body in Tir na Nog, but it's very powerful and influential in. All right,
let me pause you right there and disagree again. So you're kind of right. In Tir na Nog, there is a political body that actually rules, and that's the so-called Danan Mor, I think is how you pronounce it, and that's the so-called Tuatha de Danann that rule the government of Tir na Nog, and they have the political power. But even within Tir na Nog, the Seelie Court is the spiritual authority in Tir na Nog. Okay. They don't overrule. Now, if you read between the lines in all the previous books that have come out, you will see that the Seelie Court actually does wield the power. Like, whatever they want happens.
Sure.
So it's not like they're not ruling. It's almost like a reverse figurehead type situation where if you were in Tir na Nog, you would say, like, yeah, the Seelie are kind of like the spiritual leaders, blah, blah, blah. But it's actually the reverse. the Danan families are actually figureheads to what the Seelie Court actually wants to happen.
Right.
And again, like we could talk about the Tuatha De Danann because that's a really complicated thing as well. But the ruling families of Tir na Nog, the ruling elf lineages, call themselves the Tuatha De Danann.
Okay, good. And that's kind of what I meant when I said that they're not actually a ruling body, but they're powerful. Like you described.
They're
it
as
better.
powerful as they want to be.
Yeah.
That's how they want to leave it alone until they want something, and then it gets done.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. You said it better than I could. Now, the leader of the queen of the Seelie Court is Lady Brain Day. She's the queen. She actually is not originally from the from that metaplane. She was an elf in Tir na Nog, and she kind of through social machinations became queen, and she appointed herself through marriage, I think, didn't she?
Yeah, that's again, nothing is easy with this. It's all very complicated. So there is, number one, a question as to whether or not she is an elf. And if you really want to get into that, you can read between the lines in Court of Shadows, and it's possible that Lady Brain is not actually an elf. Secondly, she was not just appointed; she actually did marry into it. She married Liam O'Connor, and then Liam O'Connor mysteriously disappeared. After he kind of set things up, and then made Lady Brain the queen, and then she took over afterwards. And she had been being mentored by Queen Alachia, who's familiar to some folks if you are familiar with Earth Dawn or some of the early Shadowrun stuff. So, yeah,
Right.
It didn't just happen. She didn't really even politic it. Like, she was placed there and groomed for it.
I do feel like the complexity of even explaining this kind of is thematic to the Seelie Court in and of itself. It's like,
yes, it's all like deceit and lies and half truths and ununderstandable things.
Right. That's the whole thing. So
They lead that in if you read the fluff stories in Court of Shadows, where it's talking about her essentially being groomed since childhood, like since very early age, if not longer, for this position.
And groomed by different people with different agendas too. So that's kind of an interesting thing.
So that kind of, I think, does a good job of setting up what the Seelie Court kind of is. You can very vaguely getting to it was, or at least used to be, pretty difficult. It was a very ephemeral, moving around constantly, very difficult to find metaplane inside a metaplane, and usually the only way that people got there was by invitation or by other nefarious means. But now the Yellowstone calamity happened, which, long story short, there was almost a giant super volcano exploded, but the Earth, I guess, kind of gulped it down, and then it ripped open a hole in a metaplane, and it's not why you can find this permanent opening now to the metaplane where the Seelie Court exists. So
yes, kind of. And again, if you read between the lines, the Yellowstone calamity didn't just create portals. What happened was it tore the fabric of those metaplanes, especially particularly the ones that are connected to the Seelie and the Unseelie and the Fae. And what's happening is all the mana and the magic. Again, this is all you have to read between the lines. And again, if you want to do deep dives into Court of Shadows, there is a lot of really cool stuff, but it doesn't ever come out and say it. But I'll come out and say it because GMs need to know. The Fae metaplanes, the main Fae metaplane and the Unseelie and the Seelie are both leaking. All three are leaking their mana into our world, which has a number of different ramifications. For example, the book Forbidden Arcana is a direct result of all this magic leaking, and so it changed the matrix of magic in the sixth world, and so that's why you get that Forbidden Arcana book kind of talking about why magic is a little bit different than it was before, and also the fairy freaking out about how they need to conserve magic and blah blah blah.
Yeah. So that sort of gets us started of what it is, but Cassie, there are a lot of different ways or reasons that you might go there, but you have been you have been on at least a run where you actually were there. What I think this might be a good like way to segue into how this new setting that it might feature in your games. How did you and why were you there?
Yeah, so we haven't been going fully into like the court, but we have been essentially going into places they have set up here, mostly in our realm, or we at least it seems like it's in our realm. Who really knows once we cross that magical line if we're still in like still on Earth. But yeah, we've definitely did one. We did one in the castle in Dunkelzand's Will. Like you can stay a night there, where basically the GM had set up that castle is kind of one of those portals essentially to that meta plane. And so the Unseelie and or more of like the Wild Fae and stuff become involved there at night, and so that's why it's hard to stay there for a whole time. Then we did another ones where like we kind of crossed toward Portland, and we find these big Fae markets that are set up, and we go there to do different things. Like we've met Marcus Coe, who's one of the named NPCs in the Court of Shadows.
Made him.
Did you? Yeah, I met him. I kidnapped him.
I modeled him after my son, so he'll get a kick
Oh,
out of it.
good. No, he was fantastic. He was a lot of fun. Yeah, we kidnapped him in one of these markets. But the markets are really neat because we'll find all types of little artifacts. Like I think we found fruit that basically was flaming, and even some point when a fight broke out, somebody threw it like a grenade almost, like and set somebody on fire with it. We found like a fountain that if you throw a coin into it and traded a memory, it will answer any question that you ask. And all through this market, like it takes no money, and so we would constantly the keepers would walk around with coins and stuff, and they would trade in memories. And I think I traded one of my memories for a marble that inside of it had an ocean with a ship, and as it sailed, a dolphin would jump up every so often in this marble.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's really cool.
So that's how we have kind of played with it. And then naturally we got involved with like the factions, right? Or like the Unseelie were doing this, and they would hire us to go do a run, and then the Seelie would find out we did that run and get irritated about it. They would hire us to go back and hit the Seelie, and then we were being manipulated the whole time.
And there are tons of different factions within this whole world, okay? And it's really a lot, and they're all at each other's throats and trying to vie for position, and they all have their own agendas that have to do with overlapping things. Though one of the obvious ones that you'll hear about is the Seelie. It's the Seelie Court, right? And correct me if I'm wrong, but the Seelie are really worried and concerned about mana. Well, I feel like maybe I'm going to get this wrong because I see you might have been talking about this in the chat just a second ago, but aren't they really concerned about mana conservation because they believe that they were overuse of mana was what resulted in the end of the fourth world and how they got cut off from what they call the mortal plane?
Yeah, that's what they say.
Yeah,
but it isn't proven that the mana is even finite in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And it isn't proven, of course, and kind of Shadowrun people kind of know that that's not necessarily even the truth, because like the cycles of magic just come and go, regardless of what the Seelie do.
Sure.
But creating that narrative allows them to paint the Unseelie as the boogeyman.
Right, and it allows them to maintain control because that's what they use to that excuse is what they use to justify the tight control that they hold over things, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, the Seelie are they're not the good guys. You know what I mean? Like I know it's tempting to think of the Seelie as the good group of Fae and then the Unseelie as the bad group, but I don't think that that's what's happening.
That's not a feeling I ever actually got.
No, they're elves. They're all about their own selfish purpose. You'll never convince me elves are out for other people.
Yeah.
Even fairy elves amongst all others.
Yeah. But can we stop here and define a couple more terms before we move forward?
Absolutely.
So the Fae themselves is not very well defined yet. but again, if you read between the lines, the in legends, like in human legends, all of the meta types are kind of Fae in their own way. But in the sixth world, the Fae are not metahumans, or that is to say that the metahumans aren't necessarily the Fae, but the Fae or the fairy or the however you want to say it, they are the inhabitants of this fairy realm, and there are elves on that realm, and it's almost like divergent evolution, right? So like wherever the elves came from in the first place, whether they came from the fairy realm originally or whether they came from our world originally and went there, during the fourth, and maybe even earlier, the fourth world when the magic was high, then the fifth world where it was low, and then our world now, there's been a divergent evolution.
Sure.
Because obviously on our world, during the fifth world, there was no evolution of elves. Like there was just, they didn't exist. But in the fairy metaplane, time works so much differently that they've had thousands and thousands and thousands of years to become different things. So you could like spend a day in our time on the fairy plane and you would have been there 1,000 years. So they've had untold time to become different things than our elves on the sixth world. And so basically, if you want to say like what a true fairy is somebody who is from that metaplane. That's their native plane. That's
I'm glad you brought that up, because that was definitely a point of confusion I had early on in the book. One of my biggest criticisms for the Court of Shadows book, if we want to get some of that type of conversation going, is that it felt very confusing and almost a little disorganized at the beginning, because I felt like I constantly, for the first chapter or two, felt like I missed a chapter. Like I missed, I actually at one point went back and was like, am I sure I read all this? Because I feel like it's being written about, it's being talked about, like I should already know what you're talking about, and I don't. And one of those things was the interchanging of the term fae and fairy, and at one point the narrator of the chapter even refers to metahumans. And I was confused because it felt like being told from the perspective of a fae from that metaplane, but it was talking about metahumans like almost as a we, and that clears it up, what you just said there.
I think the book also makes a little bit of an assumption that you're already familiar with how the Seelie Court and the fairy are in pop culture, because you can find this kind of stuff in like the Dresden Files and Patricia Briggs's world and lots of other kind of urban fantasy books.
Sure.
And I think it draws a little bit off of that you already have an idea of, so already pre-built.
Yeah, and it absolutely does. I don't know if you saw any of Monica's journals, like her creation journals that she was posting before the Court of Shadows came out.
No, I didn't.
And she basically writes, World of Darkness stuff, and that's where she was kind of coming from on this. And that is all over. Like, like the other iterations of the Seelie Court and the Fae stuff, from pop culture, like you said, Cassie, is all over this book. And it's not necessarily just the Shadowrun versions of it that came before, which is very confusing and can be very confusing for people who played Shadowrun and brought their ideas of what the Fae or the Tuatha or the Seelie Court was into this book. I had to reread it like 4 or 5 times myself, just trying to jive all the stuff that I knew with the new information that was coming out.
One thing I want to talk about, if we could jump to that, one thing I will note is the book is really well written. I must give some compliments to there, because I know often these books get hit on for like editing and different stuff like that. This one is actually it's very well done. So,
yeah, and I'm glad you said it, Cassie, because me and Cassie talked a bit about this. Obviously, you might imagine behind the scenes a little bit, and that's something we said to each other, which is, aside from the complaints I have about other things, and beside my own personal tastes, like the book is one of the most well written. I really enjoyed reading a lot of it.
I liked the art and stuff in it too. Like it's really well designed. But
it's the prettiest books so far. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things I was going to ask about, and we should touch on a little bit, is the Sixth World Tarot stuff is all in this book. Like the factions and stuff like that draw a lot of power from it. The Seelie Court mentions it a lot. They consider them powerful objects. You want to talk about that, Opti?
Yeah, it seems like this book places quite a particular importance on the Sixth World Tarot, and and I'm still not sure how I feel about it. But I felt like, anyway, can you explain that? Like, what is the what kind of a position is the tarot, Sixth World Tarot, being given? Was it new to this book? Like, was it really being pushed in this one, or what? Can you talk about that at all?
I can't talk about it from a game design perspective, because I wasn't involved in the planning of this book. I had a very small bit in creating just one chapter, but yes, it was happening concurrent with the Sixth World Tarot deck and the Book of the Lost. So all that stuff was happening at the same time, and somewhere along the line, the decision was made: if we're going to have factions, which of course, you have the Seelie Court and there's going to be factions, why don't we just kind of go with this and make the tarot something that is ancient, maybe even more ancient than the Seelie Court. In fact, if you read between the lines in Book of the Lost, you'll find that it is more ancient than the Seelie Court.
Right, and you mentioned the factions because, am I correct that most, if not all, of the major factions that are mentioned are like named after the major arcana, aren't they?
Yes, and it seems like in the downtime during the Fifth World, when the Seelie Court was cut off from Earth, they developed their factions based on the old arcana, which is the cards, of the major arcana, I should say. I don't know how much your listeners are familiar with tarot and arcana and all that, so I don't want to presume too much. But there's a minor arcana and a major arcana, and the major arcana, I don't even know how to say that word. But whatever it is, there's major and minor, and the major are the ones that aren't connected necessarily to numbers or suits. They're just the ones that kind of exist off, in their own little thing. And so it looks like
the Hanged Man and
Death and the Dragon and so,
Right. And you'll find too, in an interesting way, the Seelie don't necessarily follow the Sixth World Tarot. So the Sixth World Tarot deck, for example, the Death card is 404, but in the Seelie Court, it's still Death. There's some of the ones that have crossed over, and it's all very confusing and jumbled. But essentially, yes, the Seelie has broken off into factions of the tarot, and they are seeking these cards. But even if they don't have access to the cards themselves, the factions have taken on the characteristics of the arcana. So that's how the book is framed. That there are these factions based on the tarot arcana.
Yeah, I was like I said, I've felt really disconnected, or not disconnected. That's the wrong word. I felt really like when the tarot first was mentioned, I was excited about it, but I feel like I'm struggling to care, and in this book it felt like it just felt odd to me, and I admit I may have a unique kind of, maybe it's just me, but it felt weird and almost like, I don't know, I felt like why is it being shoved in here? I don't understand why they're searching for these cards, and it's not really explained, so it felt strange to me.
Yeah, like I said, if you pair this with Book of the Lost,
which I haven't read, to be fair, so yeah,
that's fine. Like once this book was done and people started to play it, and Monica kind of went on to greener pastures and was doing her own thing. They still needed people to write Seelie Court stuff, in the books that went ahead. So I got the piece about the Seelie Court in Book of the Lost, and I tried to kind of go into that, like how the arcana is important to the Seelie and why it's important and what the tarot deck is, and that explains a lot of it, and it kind of ties in with the factions. So hopefully that'll do a little bit more. If you just read that one bit, I think it's called Aligning the Court, in Book of the Lost, that might help you to kind of get a grasp on.
Can you give us like a 3-sentence explanation of why it's important? Is it just power? Just more power, basically?
No. Okay. So yeah, I guess. So essentially, there's the Aligning the Court bit in Book of the Lost has one of these factions that's a hidden faction. It's not in Court of Shadows, but it's the High Priestess faction. And there's this person who's going back and forth with the leader of the faction, essentially saying, "Hey, I found this card when I was like out and about in the sixth world, and it mirrors this card that I was given. And when I took it outside the plane, it changed. And like, what's up with that?" And so he starts looking into it and discovers that like the arcana is deeply connected with magic of the world. It's connected to the earth in some way that goes beyond knowledge, even Seelie knowledge, because the Seelie in their arrogance assumed that the tarot was their thing, because they were disconnected, and so when they found out that it actually is not them, and it changes based on Earth's culture and not their own, that kind of sparked interest. So this guy started looking for history to kind of go back, and so he found out that that these cards actually changed themselves. So they haven't always been cards. Sometimes, like when they first started appearing in the sixth world, sometimes they were little computer hologram type things.
Sure.
And so like the form that they take is not all the same, and they've been in the past like written on human skin or on rocks or on cuneiform tablets or whatever. So these are things that are deeply tied to magic and culture within the world, and their exact nature is still to be reflected. But to the people who have the original cards, whatever they are, they can tap into tremendous power. And the more cards you bring together, the more power you have. Almost like the Infinity Gauntlet or something like that.
Right.
Okay.
So yeah, that's kind of in a nutshell.
You're stacking power, folk guy, is what you're telling me.
Yeah. Not only that though, because like each one will have like a different particular power, or each one will have like a different resonance with some particular destiny, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
A lot of that's still to come, but
yeah, I'm really fascinated by a lot of this this stuff that you're talking about, like what the tarot is, its connection to the world, where this metaplane, this Fey metaplane comes into play, what its relationship to Tir na Nog is, and I want to talk about that, but I'm gonna say, if we don't get to it, let's talk about it in the after party. And people, you should remember that Opti's here after the show to answer some questions from us, and you should come up with questions about this kind of stuff to ask afterwards, because I still want to talk. We're drifting a little bit away from the Seelie Court itself.
Can I say one more thing before we continue about the Seelie Court? Okay, this is again defining terms, because if you start reading the Court of Shadows, you will see the Tuatha De Danann brought up again and again and again, and that is not the same Tuatha De Danann that exists in Tir na Nog. Those are two completely separate entities. The Tuatha De Danann are the original Seelie Court Fae that started their group. The sixth world, the elves that lead Tir na Nog, co-opted that language and just call themselves that. That's just what they call the leadership of the government. But in the Fey metaplane, the Seelie or Unseelie Court, Tuatha De Danann refers to, I think it's like the 32 original families that founded the Seelie Court itself. And so the Tuatha De Danann are the truest of the true Fey, and those houses like are the most important ones. And so those are the ones that really rule the court.
Right.
So like it's important, like every time you see it in Court of Shadows, Tuatha De Danann has nothing to do with Ireland or Tir na Nog or anything going on in the sixth world. And every time you see Tuatha De Danann outside of Court of Shadows, it refers to the government of Tir na Nog.
Right. That's
terribly confusing, and I wish that would have been explained somewhere, but it still never has.
Right. So why? So now that people can actually go there and presumably might get jobs to travel to this metaplane and to interact in the Seelie Court, this whole like the Court of Shadows itself is couched as is pitched as an alternate setting source book. So that's what you're getting out of this book, or about that. That's what you're getting out of that book is an entire description of this whole setting of this metaplane, and in particular, it spends a lot of time talking about the Seelie Court, which is a faction as well as an actual place. And Cassie, what are some of the ways what are some of the things that you might get asked to do to go to the Seelie Court or within the Seelie Court in order to as a Shadowrunner, as a person who plays Shadowrun, what might you get asked to do?
Yes. So the Seelie Court's going to be heavily more oriented toward social stuff. So if you have a face-heavy team or people who are willing to roleplay and do social, the Seelie Court is fantastic for that. It's actually violence is abhorred, and you shouldn't be carrying around weapons most of the time while you're in there. So that's another reason too that like the Seelie Court won't necessarily be the ones who are throwing punches, right? So maybe they hire Shadowrunners to do it for them because they don't want to be seen as being violent or that abhorrence. Protection
Sounds
jobs.
familiar.
Yeah, right. Yeah, protection jobs also
Yeah,
are big in there, and trading and information. All of the corps are trying to get it in, and only Renraku so far has any type of contract with them. So trying to get that leg up.
technically true.
I think
okay.
I think As Technology maybe doesn't have a contract with them, but they're very big and influential there. I know that.
They do. But there's called Snake Mountain, I think.
It's like
of,
Coapedal or something like that. I'm
yeah,
pronouncing
like
that wrong.
they call themselves something different because they know that like As Technology or Azatlan or what they
Nobody
stand for is
cares.
completely. It's persona non grata.
Yeah.
Like they don't
Yeah.
they don't want them there, and so they're like, oh, okay, we'll just change our name, and the
Yeah,
like, okay,
because
cool.
the Azzies are like public relation masters. So.
Well, I'm just going off what's in the Court of Shadows. It
Sure.
mentions that Renraku is the only one that so far has like got a solid deal with them. What they're doing like a census or something. They're just counting
Right.
how many people are there right now, supposedly. Which it knows over and over like they don't really need this per se.
Yeah, so and you hit on so the whole setting feels to me, and I think this was intentional. It feels to me very much like if you're playing in there for any length of time, it's going to feel a lot like you're playing a D&D campaign that's very political, like one of those politics-focused D&D campaigns. You know, that's what it felt like to me while I was reading it. And a key point that Cassie's making is that it's going to feel a lot different in the sense that the mega corporations do not hold the same power that they would anywhere else. In fact, they quite often are looked down upon by the people in the Seelie Court because they're mortal outsiders with an agenda that doesn't jive with theirs.
Yeah, in fact, like they just don't know how to play the game yet.
Mhm.
And it kind of get the impression that the longer they're there, the more power they have, and that's kind of what Shadowrunners are doing there. Like they are helping different factions to gain more power. And again, if you keep in mind that like time flows way more quickly there, Renraku has already been set up. Like the Yellowstone Calamity happened like in a matter of like years. Since the book was written, or maybe even less than a year. But Renraku has already set up a presence and been trucking there for a long time. Like, so you get the sense like the corps that were ready to move on this are going to have a huge advantage, moving forward.
Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah, we didn't go really into the factions really deeply, but they are outlined really well in Court of Shadows of like the factions that are against each other. So you can easily as a GM read those and immediately know this faction wants this from this one or is opposed to this one, and so you immediately have those plot hooks to go in and start doing runs to help them help them do that.
Yeah, you go in there
And
do a lot of like spying and information gathering for different factions, and we just didn't go into that because there's so much of it there. We thought we'd get bogged down.
There's 3 more factions that are unveiled in Book of the Lost as well.
Wow.
Fantastic.
Yeah. And the factions are really integral to how things work there because, again, like Cassie said, everything is so political and social there, and everybody is constantly vying for social maneuvering and positioning and getting information on each other, and everybody's kind of like always putting on a face, but everybody also knows that they're all putting on a face, so there's like multiple layers of deceit going on at any given moment. And the book is I really enjoyed the book. Is fantastically humorous in the way that it talks about how this social interaction happens,
And that's something that a lot of the rest of the books of Shadowrun don't go into a lot about, is like the politics and factions and stuff. So this was a kind of a good start to give you an idea on a lot of that. It's touched on in other spots, but that's pretty much the core part of Court of Shadows. But even if you don't want to go to that meta plane and mess with all of the politics stuff, that's fine. The Seelie are really about artifacts and capturing neat things. So just go through a DM, like the Dungeon Master Guide or some of the old artifact hunting stuff in Shadowrun. Pull out those artifacts and go chase them down, right? Or even Earth Dawn. Like, grab some magical items and go hunt them down for the Seelie.
Yeah, because exactly, because the different factions and people in the Seelie Court, they're gathering it. They're constantly wanting to gather and hoard these magical artifacts.
And Opti can probably talk more about it. The Book of the Lost goes really into that, right? It even puts in puzzles and stuff and all that kind of items to do for like artifact hunting, or almost a little bit more of a D&D feel. Like, you want to talk about some of the stuff in that?
I don't have a lot of stuff to say, but like, Book of the Lost. Well, I mean, like, because Book of the Lost is all about the tarot, and that the Seelie cares tremendously about the tarot, so everything in there is going to be relevant.
Sure.
As a reference book. I will say also, if you're just looking for adventures right off the bat without having to think too much about it, if you go pick up Shadowrun Anarchy, there are at least 5 or 6 Seelie adventures that just have plot outlines and kind of tell you different stuff that you can do, different run ideas and different reasons why certain members of the court might want certain things, blah, blah, blah. Those are fun.
One of the big things I'll really compliment on that I loved in this book that they did that so falls short to so many of the other source books is they statted things out. I think even the Queen herself is statted out in Court of Shadows.
Yeah, problematically so, I think. I think statting up creatures of that level of power is problematic. And there's some characters that were statted up better than others. And I'm not trying to throw shade. It's just that when a group of people is given like, hey, stat this person out, and they're not compared to each other, you get get like the executioner being like just ridiculously powerful person, and then Lady Brain like doesn't even have some of the most basic stuff. Like,
I noticed that. I looked at Lady Brain, the queen of the Seelie, and I was like,
I don't know.
I might be able to take her. Yeah, I could.
Right?
That might be.
Some of that stuff doesn't always bother me too, because sometimes the big bad guy is not the to put it in awful terms, like a president of a country is probably not skilled in martial arts. That's why he has guards and stuff.
I mean, that is fair, and they do.
I know it's a little different here, but like.
And also, I guess my favorite thing to do in those situations is whatever stats you're given for a world-changing character, like those are just placeholder stats.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Yeah. And you can just assume that if they wanted to, they're going to be as powerful as they need to be.
Yeah.
Like, I think Harlequin was statted out once, and it was like...
Yeah, he's in Clutch Dragons.
Yeah, and I thought, like...
Don't trigger too many people, Opti.
Don't do that. You know what I mean?
Well, even I think Loftier and Hesby are both statted out in 4th edition.
Right. And I think that 1st edition did it better, where it was like, if any of your characters attack Harlequin, just assume that he's as powerful as he needs to be with whatever powers he needs to be to kick your runner's butts.
Yeah, and I totally get that.
That's a better way to go.
It's like, avoid that, because you end up in situations like, specifically, again, talking about Lady Brain. She, yes, they're not necessarily going to be the most powerful. Like, you made the president reference, Cassidy, or whatever. A world leader is not like, super powerful fighter or anything, but she is described as getting to where she is because she's absolutely the most charismatic and socially adept person around, and I think she has a decently lower charisma.
7.
Yeah, she has
charisma 7.
She has the charisma of like my starting character,
Right.
I know where it is.
My wife's troll face has a charisma of 7. It just started.
Right.
The other part of that too is still her events that we all just talked about how she was placed where she was. She didn't necessarily get there on her own accord. But anyway, the other thing is that like when you get about statting them out and then runners kick their butt, that's a failure on the GM. It's still your responsible as a GM to scale up anything to be a challenge to your runners, not just take things at face value.
And again, like I said, I think it's probably best to assume that that's the face that they're putting on, not their true capabilities. Like, that's them just kind of like lounging around the house, watching TV.
And also, to be fair, they describe even if it was just a feeble child stat-wise, it would still be ridiculous trying to do anything because of the levels upon layers upon bodyguards of security, you know?
Yeah.
Well, I never like the argument, don't stat something out because then they can kill it. Like, no, stat it out because then you get to see what their character is. At Harlequin stat, I've looked at it so many times, I can't tell you what his, like, Blades rating is, but I know he knows Bluegrass,
And
right?
Gangster Rap. He has Gangster
and
Rap 4.
Gangster Rap,
right?
That's right. So I love that people stat that stuff out because then that gives me a starting place as a GM to change it from there.
Fair. Some other things, yes, you might go and look for, you might be hired by people in the Seelie Court to go find artifacts, but you might also be sent to infiltrate in order to hunt down one of the many amazing magical artifacts that are housed in the Seelie Court and its various the homes of its various important people.
Yeah.
They actually list
they
list a couple of them in Court of Shadows, which are really interesting. But just use your imagination. Like there could be, they could do anything and be anything.
The Seelie Court. Good.
I was sorry, I don't want to oversell it, but like Anarchy has that exact same thing. You know what I mean? There's a 4-part adventure in the back of Anarchy where you're sent there and then like basically told, hey, infiltrate this, steal this, bring it back here, do this, and it's like you can't do it by busting through. You cannot fight your way into this. You have to go to this particular ball, during this particular festival and, sneak around here and tell this person this and this. And those are totally different runs than Shadowrunners are used to taking. So this really is an alternative setting.
Yeah.
I would say
Go ahead, Cassie.
go ahead. Oh, my favorite thing to do with artifacts that you can do with like the Seelie Court, if you want to, that's the time when to pull out whatever like fantasy world building fluff artifact you can make and just throw it in there. And like give somebody salt that they sprinkle on food and then their food talks, right? Just that's where you like start homebrewing the fun stuff to RP with, is when you start doing artifact runs. Not everything has to be a mechanical weapon foci or whatever.
Yeah, fun
Beta
little
Cab
toy
in the,
to give your
Beta Cab in the chat says, well done, you've defeated my double. That earns an audience with the real queen. Please don't get the impression that your success will be repeated. Now let's talk about what you can do for me. Like that's perfect.
That's
absolutely perfect. Yeah.
Some other really cool, I think, creative ways that they mentioned in Court of Shadows. I keep bringing that up because that's the only one that I've read having to do with the Seelie Court. But about things that you could do there are investigating mysteries. So there's all these like different weird things that go on in the metaplanes, and they might want someone, an outsider, who is not known or who they can count on to not have some sort of social agenda, to go and investigate some strange thing that happened, and trust me, there is no shortage of strange things that happen in the Seelie Court. Some of the ones that are described there, they give you some examples of mysteries that are unsolved, just to kind of whet your appetite and get your creativity going. And they're amazing. You should check it out. They're on like page 152. They start of Court of Shadows, and some guy died because he levitated into a chandelier that started spinning really fast and just got like ripped to shreds in a chandelier in the middle of the main like morning calling of the court in the middle of the court
session.
Yeah. And nobody knows why, how, or what happened. And just as an example, also you might be sent to. This was a funny one that I thought of, or not that I thought of, but I thought it was funny that they presented, was you might be sent actually to deliver other information that was found out, because here's the thing. Some of the people, important people in the Seelie Court, are kind of crazy and unpredictable and just nuts. And so much so that you might not want to be the one who is sent to actually deliver some information that is important to that person, because you don't know how that person's going to react. So it's possible that an outsider would get hired to go and just to interact with somebody. And also for other reasons, because you don't want to be seen here because your social status could be affected. So lots of really cool. I appreciated all the bizarre descriptions and the way things were described, how people act, and it's very worth the read to hear the way things are talked about and whatnot. I wish I had some examples on hand, but I was constantly chuckling to myself just the listening to the narrator describe things to you, you know.
Yeah, the Seelie, all the stuff around the Seelie Court, whether you're using Court of Shadows or, you know, doing the Anarchy jobs, they're going to essentially be runs that you need to roleplay with. They will really benefit from roleplay.
Yeah.
Because just kind of shooting your way through another run is not ever going to be the solution in the Seelie Court.
Right.
So, yeah, putting on your roleplay hats and playing make-believe is...
And that's why it's an alternate setting, you know what I mean? Because, like, that stuff, you're not going to affect the real world by doing Seelie stuff, and the real world stuff's not going to affect the Seelie, and you can kind of do whatever you want there, you know what I mean, and like kind of have it as a separate thing.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I do that a lot with especially crazy alternate locations like the Foundation runs, the Matrix, something like that. And this is a great example of some place you can just go do something else, and it's not going to affect your world immediately. You're hunted down by the next corp or whatever.
Right. Right. So I want to go around the table and talk about what your favorite thing about the Seelie Court is, or just any last thing that you want to say before we move on and close out the show and move on to the after party, which again, remember guys, stick around if you're in the chat to talk and ask questions of Opti. It doesn't have to be related to the Seelie Court. The after party is just kind of a free-for-all. But so if you've got questions for him, get those ready. But starting with, I guess I'll start with Opti. What is it that you want people to walk away from thinking or knowing, or something that hasn't been mentioned yet that you think people need to know about, or just anything that's on your mind about the Seelie Court? My
favorite thing, I guess it's not technically about the Seelie Court, but my favorite thing is the Unseelie Court. The idea, the way it's presented in the Court of Shadows is one thing, but that's not necessarily what it is. You're only getting it from the Seelie perspective, and so they're being used as a boogeyman to do all of these really shady things, almost like creating an enemy so that they can hoard power, which I know happens a lot in Shadowrun but never in real life, so we can't really relate to that. But I love the way that the Unseelie is presented, and I love the way that the Unseelie, you don't ever get to what they are in the Court of Shadows. But they are kind of picked up in other books, and I think it'll be really, really fun to see how that plays out, the Unseelie Court, because there's actually not just one, and I'll just leave it there.
Interesting.
If
Cassie,
people want to talk about that, we can, but...
We should. That might be a question I ask you in the after party, which, by the way, you might not be here live, but patrons get access to the after party on a Patreon site. Shameless plug. Cassie...
I like the homebrew high magic stuff that I can do with it. So we've given a player a feather that she wore in her hair that then whispered in her ear if someone was lying, right?
Yes.
And that's how we did a run when they didn't really have any face support. And then we've had the flame fruit that we've used as like a grenade with a fireball spell.
And that salt thing that you
keep memories.
The salt thing you mentioned was actually something I think you told me one time was in a game, right?
Yeah, I did that in another game. But yeah, so I love that kind of high magic, fun stuff that you can just open up, you know, whatever you can think of just come out of your mind and have fun with it. Definitely. The keepers, that marble I got, I still remember it. I can't remember what happened to it now after my runner died, but that marble with the ocean inside of it and the ship was just so cool.
Yeah. That sounds really neat. So my favorite thing, I've said it already a couple times, is just how... just the writing. I think the writing was amazing. I was constantly amused by the tone and the voice that was used. I actually found a little example here that I wanted to read real fast before we go to closing. It was in a section that was describing the dungeons in the Seelie Court, which are really crazy and scary sounding. But the person who's describing the dungeons was given access to them in order to describe them for you, the reader, you know. And so he's talking about, there's a little paragraph here. It says, This small chamber, mine was a cube, only a hand longer in its dimensions than my arm span, contained a single mattress of stuffed hay, a single glowing stone at the center of the ceiling, and the door which I had entered, through which now contained a dark portal to doom, and a small squat stone seat in the corner with a round hole at its center, which again seemed to contain the blackest hole I've ever seen. Any defecation by prisoners found its way to the same void of doom that prisoners who step through the doorway do. And I just thought, it's stated so matter-of-factly, and a lot of the writing was that way. That was just like sprinkled with little bits of humor that you almost get the feeling that the person writing it, being from this metaplane, doesn't understand themselves how humorous they're, like how ridiculous they sound and how ridiculous the world they live in sounds. And it was very funny. I enjoyed reading it. But yeah, so let's do this. All right, guys. That music means we've reached the end of the show, talking about today with our good friend Opti about the Seelie Court. And I had a lot of fun. As I've said, I enjoyed the book. I actually didn't think I was going to enjoy it all that much, to be perfectly honest, but I found myself really enjoying it. A lot of people talk about how, I think a lot of people complain about how it just doesn't feel like Shadowrun, and I disagree, my friend. I think a lot of the things about the Seelie Court are very Shadowrun. It's like they're just painted with a different set of colors, you know? Before we go, we always like to give our guests an opportunity to plug themselves and the things that they do. So, Opti, tell everybody where they can find you, what you're doing, anything that might be coming up. Just self-promote, plug away.
All right. So first off, please go and check out the Neo-Anarchist podcast, which is an in-character Shadowrun history told from the perspective of a crazy raven shaman. That's for all of your lore needs. If you're new to the game, or if you just want to brush up on what you know about the Sixth World, please head there. Also, any of the books that I've gotten a chance to write, such as Court of Shadows or Book of the Lost, Forbidden Arcana, what are the other ones? Cutting Aces or whatever, and upcoming novella next year. Yeah. So yeah, buy all Shadowrun books.
Yeah.
And then there's something super secret that I can't talk about. But like when it comes out, I want everybody to buy it so that we could have more of it.
Good job. So go ahead and check. Go ahead and.
No, is that the thing that Jason mentioned at Gen Con on a live stream coming out next year?
No, but that's really awesome too.
Okay.
So can I say I get everything I want next year? Is that?
Let me just say, I've heard there's a hooding book coming out. Rumor is, and I'm really looking forward to that.
That was when I first became a freelancer. I went to Jason and I was like, Jason, hooding book, we got to do this. Come on, let's do this. And I've been pushing that ever since.
I am so
finally
looking
came
forward
to me
to the
and went
hooding
like,
book.
hey, Opti, we're doing a hooding book, and I was like, yes.
Awesome.
But having said that, there's something even cooler than that coming out later.
What? All right.
Yes.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Cassie, anything that you need to plug or want to plug?
I'll do twitchtv.com/theemeraldgrid. You can come and check out all the Emerald Grid stuff, and we're going to be doing recruiting again soon, so come check us out, come play Shadowrun with us.
Excellent.
I'm going to start doing those one-shots for the Shadowcaster Network again soon, I promise.
Yeah, absolutely.
The con season's over.
Next episode that we're going to be doing in 2 weeks is going to be our guest, Todd Gizzy, who's been on here before, and we're going to be talking about space. So that's... look forward to that. Todd, I think, is going to turn into our really weird niche environments guy. Because he was on for Aquacologies. This is the last time he was on the show. Now he's coming back for space. So it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm really looking forward to it. The only thing I really want to mention before we go is for people who are listening live and who are listening at home on the podcast, we're, of course, on this new Twitch channel, the Shadowcasters Network Twitch channel. We've moved over there, and everything we're doing now is through that. So what we're doing is we're trying to get people to subscribe to that if you can. We get a lot from that helps us keep things running here in the Shadowcasters Network, and so that helps us a lot. For those of you who might not know, Amazon Prime, people who have Amazon Prime, you get 1 free month subscription that you can give to anybody. So if you haven't given that out and you think we're worth it, then go ahead and give it to us. Helps us out. Cassie's pointing to herself, saying, "No, give it to her." But yeah, so if you want to do that, for anybody who is considering possibly paying for a subscription, right now in September is Twitch's Subtember, and they're giving 50% off subscriptions that are bought and paid for in the month of September. So you could get a subscription to us for half the price, and we'd really appreciate it. Other than that, it's been a great episode, and I don't have anything else to plug. So if you want to contact us on the show, you can tweet us at 6worldpodcast or email us at theshow@sixworldpodcast.com. Our music, the outro music, which you're about to hear, is done by Johnny Nuclear and the Meltdowns. Our logo work is done by David McDermott. You can find him at sixworlddesigns.tumblr.com. From me and from Cassie and our amazing guest, Opti, goodbye.
Bye.
Peace out, y'all.
When the days have gone dark and the sky's turning gray, everybody in the world, they're just staying enslaved. The technology's machines, we just feast for the screen. Lost in reality, can't find peace in your dreams. Society sodomized by the lies and the greed. Addicted to the tech corpse.
Hello.